The Damned Heirs. Chapter 0. A Good Anarchist. Prologue. A foreword by Shauna Sefton. 0 is not often considered the first number, yet it truly is. Count from 0 to 10 and you'll need to be in sandals to count a little piggy as well. Now try counting 10 to 20. See? So why is starting at 0 considered anarchic of me? I believe it equally rebellious and even discriminatory to force me to start elsewhere. If I asked the politically minded Prime Minister of Great Britain to count to 10, would she start at 0 for me? Since there isn't a Prime Minister or a Great Britain at the time of writing, I'll substitute in our current leader, the immutable Elizabeth Liv Sarah Subson, and pass on the first-hand results of this survey. She did not. What follows is my memory about the science I helped create and the battles it drew from the adults, governments, gods, or anyone else who would presume to offer me a narrow guide to living my life in their image. I've commissioned this story and contented myself with leaving it exactly as told by the author, partly because I'm a hard-working, anarchic, scientist, fight-for-all-generations liberator and future do-gooder who only wishes she could be a writer as well. However, it is mostly because it was difficult enough giving him an abridged version of everything that happened. The author has given me a few unfiltered words here, and in my opinion some far more interesting ones he's decided should be shoved at the end, to tell you the reason I've asked for his help in telling you my history. You see, as you're given the answers to why I did what I did, how the gods, along with every other being, came to despise and rely on me, and how I ended up here, it will become exponentially more apparent what a whopping discovery I had made. My biggest mistake was giving it to the people I love, and by the time I shared it for science rather than friendship, our world and its people had already changed, become soft and too dependent on those with my power to protect them. Alas, that may yet be in your future as well, and I need the help of your generation to finally put my discovery to better use. I have a stubborn issue, a trust issue, an optimism issue, a pessimism issue, a judgment issue, a figure issue, a friends issue, and a self-awareness issue, but they're all eclipsed by the biggest. I'm really not very bright, and I'm a good few galaxies away from being as clever as people assume I am. Truthfully, I struggled in school because I always had to wait for my expectations of believability to catch up with the facts. However, I was, thankfully, full of ideas. Sometimes, if I was very lucky, I'd be grasped by an idea that was somewhere near the truth, but, in reality, my only true smarts have come from time, and I've reaped the opportunity to get more of that than anyone else. I suspect you're just the same. You're no different from me. If I've learnt one thing, it is that everybody feels the same things that hurt me would hurt anyone else, no matter what some may tell you. I've no ego left to hide the truth, so these days I can honestly say I might never have discovered the idea of the universe if it wasn't for my encounter with Thorpe here and a few birds that had a unique method of catching fish in the Mersey estuary. The very same encounter at the start of this story and what I hope is the start of your own discovery thereafter. I went on to show the gods I had discovered how to reshape space and time with my mind, and without detection. Adults and governments liked my power too much, but the gods were hiding from their own deities, afraid of their power. At first, they wanted to run away again. The use of any power without consent scared them too much, but for me, of course, they made an exception. I always wanted to be geeky, and I also spent a lot longer as a teenager than I ought to have as well. Whilst today I can boast that I think the works of science are more beautiful and infinitely more creative than any work of art could ever hope to inspire, I confess I haven't always been this comfortable. In fact, I may have to apologise for the young Shauna you're about to meet. As I recall, I was aggressively sharpening the edges of my teenage personality in an effort to own it more, even though I can attest I was actually feeling wholly unsafe inside. In fact, let me tell you now, if you want to be smart, you don't have to act like a scientist, and if you want to be passionate, you don't have to look like a rock star at Glastonbury. You can be passionate whilst sat at a computer, and you can be smart whilst dancing on stage. The only thing you can't be is somebody else. Anyway, back to naive me. I'm not sure why I acted the way I did as a teenager. Part of me thinks I was just throwing bits of personality at the wall to see what stuck, see what person I could be that others thought was cool. But what I do remember well is being in way over my head, but not for 1 second allowing myself to admit it. Looking back now, I realise what a dichotomy I was. I'd somehow become obsessed with getting my hands on all the privileges and powers that came with being a grown-up, while simultaneously rejecting the entire concept in the superiority of adulthood. For now, do not yet concern yourself about the span of time and whereabouts for me, because you can't possibly comprehend it so early in the story. All you will need is the vast worlds of your imagination to get you there. You'll meet me at age 13 when I was already trying to be an unhappy anarchist for good, but capable of accomplishing absolutely nothing, and wanting to change so much about how I was growing up. Do you remember the day you stopped wondering about the issues of society and started to think only about your own? Or did it slip past you, unnoticed as mine did? Being able to do anything unselfish is the finest trait of humanity. We're all selfish, of course. We have to be. There's no need to judge others for it. But when did that day happen? Anyway, why would you want to know my issues? Let's get started with what you don't know yet and a little of the secrets I've been preparing to hand over to you for quite some time. You will naturally want to know how this all fits into your own backstory, for it is indubitably part of your own. It is everyone's. Do you know who's in charge of your mostly lifeless universe? Who left it this imperfect and sucked all the possibilities out of it? Gods are seen as superior beings only because they helped usher in our creation. You should already know me well enough to assume that I do not accept conception as a qualification for omnipotence. In fact, they mothballed all the wonder and magic you feel is absent from the world. They're the reason that all our stories of myths and heroes could never be reality. The Demos and Widdicals worship, read, live fearing the judgment of the invisible but very real deities, and we shall meet them all as if they are separate species, but they are in fact all the same. As whites are with blacks, as Hindus are with Jews, they're all gods, members of the most ancient beings in the universe. They were practically born with it, endowed with the extra dimension to their atoms that afforded them control over all the lower dimensions, and, as gods want to be, built entirely in our human image. Wink. The heat and turmoil of the Big Bang 13,700,000,000 years ago is of course too remote to fathom. You may question how they evolved and grew in the hot soup that was the very, very early universe. So did I. But if one thing is logical, it is that life may appear improbable, but hardly impossible. You are proof of that certainty. The deities may claim to have created life, but they simply provided our seeds with a new nurturing home, this planet Earth being one of them. You may have heard Earth described as being in the Goldilocks position, not too hot or cold. Think about that original, scalding primordial universe again. Another absolute certainty is that hot things always cool down. About 10 to 17 million years after the super-hot Big Bang, our universe soup cooled enough so that for several millions of years, the whole universe occupied the right temperature for liquid water and for life. We know from Earth's bacteria and microorganisms that plenty of life has mechanisms for hibernating indefinitely. Ergo, the life evolving alongside the deities just had to wait for places like Earth to appear. A Goldilocks baby universe is obvious when you think about it, and the universe was small enough for the chance of the right elements combining to be just a little less miraculous. This is where the gods were born, a species that are all collectively known as Teetidals, but today are, broadly speaking, broken up into deities who became the de facto gods through the fear of the other two main cultures, the Demos and Widdicals. Teetidals evolved remarkably quickly, but then they had an ace up their sleeve. They called their power Alpha, or, as I know it, the incomplete science that crudely allowed them to manipulate dimensions and misshape the universe. I've heard some people say that I fought the titles over my discovery, but I was only trying to help them see what, to me at least, seemed entirely self-evident from the outset. You see, using the extra dimension their way damaged the universe's ID. It would leave a thorn in the mind style illness, and if they didn't punish each other for it, then the thorn would also annoy the universe's omnipresent psychopathic deities, who would. You see, their ideas about Alpha were based on practically the same incomplete science as humanity's in the 21st century, and simply couldn't be right. Even we humans knew we didn't have all the information. Despite accomplishing so much with it, we knew we were missing answers. As a result, you find the Demos and Widdicals stealing everything humans make because of what our science helped us achieve without an extra dimension, and because of their inherent distrust of using their own alpha power. It is gratifying to know that we are part of a species that in just 12,000 years of science had accumulated the same knowledge as a race born practically at the beginning of time, and we'd also put it to better use. In that knowledge, I should have acted differently towards my fellow humans. My perception of grown-ups was always so tainted. I didn't trust any of them. Not all of them were parents, teachers, governments, or gods telling me what I ought to do with my own freedom. Some humans were extremely curious and excitable pioneers in a simple material world. These are the ones who brought humans so far so fast, and who'd have done the right thing and shared my discovery with everyone. Probably for money at first, but nobody's perfect. I least of all. Nevertheless, it took someone like me, unswayed by titles and human sciences, to reach the obvious conclusion that, if alpha power made people feel nauseated, uncomfortable, and threatened when using it, it was because they were doing something wrong, not because it was a curse. Imagine every time you used your own gifts, the universe itself tainted you with a sinking dread, an inescapable and unwelcome feeling afterwards, like sitting in a prison cell, unable to escape punishment from an invisible, all but dead deity. And if neither of those things got you, your own race would condemn or cast you out for carelessly risking everyone's lives. How long would it take you to ask the question, what am I doing wrong? Instead of asking this, they opted to minimize and control their risks, turning their gift into their own shackle. This is the problem with being a child or being subordinate to anything, anyone, to history or society. Those things will tell you what your gifts are because it's prized in their world. Something brand new adds no immediate value to anyone. Most of what I believe is provably right, or at least not wrong, but instead it is so often confused with wanton revolutionism. It took many long years of trial and error for me to understand my discovery, and all I wanted to do was put the ID, or web as I knew it, to some good use. Yet I was delayed again and again by their distinct distrust for me, and my abhorrent power greater than the gods, as one wizened old man put it. Would that I could just get 5 minutes of silence from all of them so that I could sit down and try and appreciate it myself. I once heard a politician say, let's not let the idea of perfection be the enemy of progress when those changes are intended to be for the better. And remembered feeling shocked that I agreed with it because change won't be perfect. It shouldn't be. Nothing is perfect right now, so why should the future be? It's a simple fact that in order for things to progress, things must always be imperfect. In evolution, a species that has achieved perfect adaptation will be the next to go extinct. My discovery didn't match what the Tidals knew. How could it? It was destined to replace it. But there was an inherent assumption that it couldn't be worthwhile even before we tried. The ancient Greeks called something similar to my discovery the Aether, something that permeates the universe, and scientists right up to the time of Einstein still believed in a modified version called the luminiferous ether, an imperceptible medium that fills the universe like an ocean, before Einstein replaced that with another calculatable but equally immaterial concept called space-time. Humans got close with something called a timescape, but it was a force without a mechanism, and without that, timescape predictions were incorrect. So, what I discovered in brief was that every part of the universe was represented in a tiny dimension by point nodules, which are all bonded with each other. Every atom, every person, every star, every millimeter of empty space is connected by the universe's inner dimension, ID. It is estimated that a sugar cube-sized portion of air contains 45 billion molecules, and I'm afraid that is where the reasonably manageable numbers end. The number of atoms is estimated at 535 quadrillion, and quarks in those atoms are estimated at a mystifying 383 quintillionths. So, when I tell you that there are at least a further 2 bonds connecting 3 nodes of the ID that provide the identity for every single quark, you must at least appear to be suitably dumbfounded. And that's just where there is something 4-dimensional. Humans can perceive only a narrow amount of the electromagnetic spectrum that we call light. We don't see shorter wavelength X-rays and longer wave radio, for example. We can also only perceive the 4 dimensions we live in. Light is only 3-dimensional, unaffected by time, and we can see its influence, but not the dimension of light itself, which is why it appears to scientists as both a particle, a wave, and neither. The nodes of the ID are the zeroth dimension, and bonds built up between them become the first and every additional dimension thereafter. Look to the sky at night, across the whole universe. Look around you. Every point of space, everything you see, empty or full, is part of the universe because it is built of ID nodes and bonds that connect and shape everything. Nodes are simply where multiple bonds cross or meet, like at the center of a web. These bonds, like strands of spider silk, stretch and shrink indefinitely, like the potential energy of an elastic band stretched between 2 pinheads to inject into each point the 2 fundamental energies of overbearing and stretchy times, flanking a tiny amount of subdued gravity at the center. It is the bonds that bind and pull the nodes into simple patterns that together build each individual particle's dimensions that shape and energize all of its properties, forces, and reactions that will eventually build atoms as well as life with the universe at large. It is those bonds that I can stretch and move with my power, not the nodes. Like the Titidals, I was born with an extra bond and therefore an extra dimension built onto all my atoms. In general, the more dimensions you have, the more control you have over those below, i.e., magnets have more dimensions than gravity, so they easily overcome it. But empty space has no dimensions, so as one-dimensional time energy stretches out across the universe, it looks like dark energy expanding the space. Whereas in a dense galaxy, the accumulation of all the fragments of gravity make galaxies appear more massive, as in dark matter. The Titidals, on the other hand, without my discovery, use their extra-dimensional atoms to blindly pull the universe's nodes around instead, which crudely warps the usually straight-ish bonds of the web into twists, knotting the idea like a pair of earphones in the pocket and effectively destroying it for all future use. This incorrect use of their power is what their entire species could sense afterwards that drove them crazy like a splinter in the corner of their eye. Not once in over 12 billion years did they think they were using their power wrong, that they needed to study and understand it better. If I can offer them one defense, it's that they hadn't guessed the existence of nodes or bonds, but that is, in my mind, the smallest compliment I can make them. They just saw the effects of their power, never questioning how it worked. Their ignorance did have one indisputable use for the Titidals, however. They had been kept alive where others died while the universe cooled. We're living, therefore what we're doing must be key to our survival, they said as if it were evidence. But it was no more than superstition, like wearing lucky underpants. Nevertheless, it is a very difficult statement to disprove. Therefore, all I could do was live longer again to prove I was right. I did my best. They had already lived through a war that all but ended the rest of the universe 12 billion years ago. That war led the deities to create humans and the other titles to reinforce the fear of their own power. So, up against the word of gods, an eternity of evidence, and our own existence, even for a successful, respected, charismatic, and discipled anarchist, that's a hard belief to disprove. As one last primer before you meet its title, my friend Thorpe here, a demos by birth, but he ran away and was adopted by the Whittakers until he ran away from them too, told me about this threatening universe before I ever set foot on Anchorrow Island. When the demos and the Whittakers go to war, he mumbled gravely as we walked into town, plants stop growing, volcanoes stop erupting, the sun stops rising, and the sky drops to the floor. But the deities, we hide from them because they taught the universe a whole new lesson in war. You need to understand this, Shauna, he said, but I really didn't at the time. Some thought our alpha power meant the universe willed us to do whatever we wanted with it. These few became the universe's deities, and those of slightly less certain convictions, we became the demos. Others thought the universe still had a mystery that would never be discovered until they chose not to use their alpha. How can you isolate a scientific result if you keep changing the environment with alpha? They would argue. These named themselves Whittakers. When the war began, the titles split into the fearsome warring deities bent on exploring the absolute use of their power, the demos who supported the deities but shied away from battle, and the Whittakers who were condemned to reluctantly defend themselves against both, whilst forever on the run. Every able being heeded the call eventually to finally end the fight, but they all saw their worlds pulled apart, split in two. The light universe disappeared, and a bleeding dense darkness swallowed them into isolation. The fight blasted out in the skies until everyone was alone. Everything stopped, went cold, dark and silenced. These people were gods, Shauna. Hundreds of gods could feel atoms being violently shook apart all across the universe, the nuclear forces breaking down, and when the deities could no longer hold it all together, everything, even their own alpha, wandered, drifting freely across the empty cosmos. Thoughts became forces, and their bodies were ripped and set aflame that would burn for 100 million years. Nothing was left. The universe recovered slowly, barely limping on even millions of years later, but we're lucky to be born now, not then. I've only seen the universe as it grew a new life, but I'm hopeful that we'll be even luckier to see a universe for once where deities may hunt and punish us, but will never find a way back. If they can't ever come back, we'll be without a war between the surviving demos and Whittakers too, he finished despondently. I still remember his words, his face, as hard and painful as it had been one similar day in the future when the combined efforts of all titles were cataclysmically surpassed in what we call the USE. We will come to that sore memory in due course. For now, myself and the author shall attempt in this book to help you discover the ID, in the hopes that you will not only avoid that fate and follow me in solving the greatest enigma ever, but by trying to imagine a way to use it together, scientifically, sit back down, with computers and testing, and without the damned alpha power that cursed the titles and my future from the universe's distant past. So that's it. You're now ready to start my journey and discover ways you could stop the sun from swallowing the earth, or stop the endlessness of space expanding until we're the only ones left. How to stop Yellowstone erupting, a solar flare, stop a meteor, black holes, or a supernovae wiping the pages of our history clean. And if you can stop all that, just think about what you can start. As a final word of caution for what follows in this book, however, I have been brave enough to tell my mistakes, but please do not let them put you off. My failings, as well as my theory, need equal amounts of your imagination, so you can do better. So, please find a way to manipulate the ID without using or giving anyone dangerous, divisive, and destructive alpha power. Do it together, so it's not just one troubled little girl crying about people she can't control. Prove that a different and improbably perfect new idea for the world can be inside anyone's head. On your journey, you may well question how on earth I am writing these pages to you from your future. Well, that's one last personal secret I'd like to keep for now, but if raising a son has taught me anything, it's that talking more with others is a grace without limit. So, there's a good chance I'll change my mind yet.